Hey, folks. I'm Nathaniel Stinnett. I am the founder and executive director of the Environmental Voter Project. And today we have a mini briefing where, in a really short period of time, we're going to brief you on a particular topic. Today, we're going to be talking about Virginia and particularly climate voters in Virginia. So let's go ahead and get started. First, I'm going to tell you a little bit about our nonprofit. The Environmental Voter Project is a nonpartisan nonprofit that is laser focused on just doing two things. One, we identify people who care deeply about climate and the environment who aren't voting. And then two, we get them to vote. We turn them into consistent voters. We work with thousands of volunteers around the country. We run hundreds of voter turnout messaging experiments each year, isolating which messages work best at accomplishing this goal. And as part of this work, we get a lot of really interesting actionable data, and that's what I'm going to share with you today. So I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to talk about Virginia for a little bit. All right, here's what we're seeing in Virginia. First, the Environmental Voter Project has identified 320,952 targets. So what does it mean to be a target of the Environmental Voter Project? Well, it means you're already registered to vote. You're highly likely to list climate or other environmental issues as your number one priority. Yet, you're unlikely to vote this November without being mobilized to do so. And we know that you're unlikely to vote this November because we've looked at these people's public voting histories and seen that they did not vote in the 2020 presidential election or any election since then. So if that's your voting history, we're going to assume that you need to be pushed to the polls. All right, that's a big population of potential voters who could express their priority for politicians leading on climate. And how big is it? Well, look at the context here. Barely 4.5 million ballots were cast in Virginia last time there was a presidential election. So 320,000 potential first-time climate voters is a big deal. There are two competitive congressional races in Virginia this year, at least as the Cook Political Report is handicapping them, the 2nd and the 7th. And we're going to get into a little bit of detail on those two congressional districts in a second. Perhaps most importantly, though, is this next bullet point, and that is that early voting has already begun in Virginia. It's election day. It is already election day in Virginia. And this is important, not just because ballots are being cast, but because it means there's an enormously large window for us, for you and me, for donors, for volunteers, for turnout organizations, to communicate with voters at the precise moment that they can then just go and cast their ballots. And so this is a big, big opportunity for us to make a difference. All right, who are these low propensity environmental voters? Who are these 320,952 low propensity climate voters in Virginia? Well, if you look at the chart here on the bottom, there's some really interesting data. First, I'd like you to look at this very, very bottom row that says Reg voters. That is the demographic breakdown of all registered voters in Virginia. So you'll see right here, 9.4% of registered voters in Virginia are between the ages of 18 to 24. Or if you look over here, 69%, 69.7% of registered voters in Virginia are white. All right, right above it is a row that's called LPEVs. That stands for low propensity environmental voters. These are our targets. These are those 320,000 super environmentalists who are unlikely to vote. And we wanted to give you a sense of who they were, but the best way to do that is to also provide the context of what the overall electorate in Virginia looks like. So what are a few things that immediately jump out? First, look at the age demo breakdown. Roughly 27% of registered voters in Virginia are under the age of 35. But when you isolate these low propensity climate first voters, 84% of them are under the age of 35. 84! Now, we always see our target population, these voters that we targeted EVP, as being disproportionately young. But this is more dramatic than we normally see. This is an extraordinarily young population of potential voters, these low propensity environmental voters. In fact, you see there are so many of them that it really just falls off a cliff when it comes to age breakdowns after we get rid of those people who are under the age of 35. All right, the second interesting thing, there's a pretty significant gender gap when we're comparing low propensity environmental voters to the overall electorate in Virginia. So first off, look at the registered voters in Virginia. Women are about 5, almost 6 percentage points more prevalent in the electorate than men are. That's not dramatically different from what we see in many other states. But then that gender gap doubles to being a 12 percentage point gap among these low propensity environmental voters. And to be clear, that increase in the gender gap is not being driven by vote propensity. In other words, we're not seeing this because women are awful voters. In fact, women tend to be slightly better voters than men are. So what's driving this change here is that women are much, much more likely to list climate as their top priority than men are, especially in states like Virginia. All right. Finally, when we look at the racial breakdown of these low propensity environmental voters, they're disproportionately people of color. We see that in Virginia, and we also see that in all of our states at the Environmental Voter Project. In Virginia in particular, this is being driven by Black voters and AAPI voters, both of whom are much, much higher represented among these low propensity environmental voters. All right, so that's who these people are. Now, let's look at the state of the race. As of this morning on September 24th, at the 538.com polling average site, Kamala Harris has less than a 7 percentage point lead over Donald Trump in an average of the polls. Virginia is closer than a lot of people think. I'm not trying to imply that it's going to be a nail biter in Virginia this November, but if you're one of these people who thinks of Texas as almost being a battleground state, well, the difference in the polling average between the two candidates in Texas is almost exactly the same as it is in Virginia. And so Virginia really, it ain't a slam dunk for anybody. And I'm sure many of you know that there is currently a Republican governor in Virginia. So this is a fairly purple state. All right. When we look at the congressional races going on, a lot of them might be interesting, but two of them in particular are looking to be very, very competitive, and that's the 2nd and the 7th. Both of these races are rated as competitive by the Cook Political Report. You'll see the 2nd Congressional District, which is down here. These are our targets, these dots here, down here along the eastern shore and also the very, very southeastern part of the state. That's represented by Jen Kiggins. She's a Republican incumbent. This district has an R+2 partisan lean. That means that on average, it trends 2 points more Republican than the median congressional district. We at the Environmental Voter Project have identified over 22,000 of these low propensity environmental voters in the Virginia 2nd. If we look at the 7th, that's an open seat. This is the seat that Abigail Spanberger is no longer running for. This has a D1 partisan lean, so it's almost as like even down the middle a district as you can find. The Environmental Voter Project has identified almost 20,000 targets in this district. Now, to be clear, there hasn't been much polling on either of these races, but to the extent we do have public polls, both of them are polling within the margin of error. But I want to be clear, margins of error are very big in congressional district polls. Congressional district polls are really, really hard to do well because you have a really small population that you're trying to get a representative sample of. And so don't read too much into the polls, but to the extent you want to take anything out of them, it's close. It's close. If you want to be part of our work at the Environmental Voter Project, mobilizing these over 320,000 climate first low propensity voters that we've identified in Virginia, please do one of the following. First, donate to support our work. You can point your camera on your phone at this QR code, and it will take you to our website to donate, or you can click on the link in this video. Please donate to support our work. We're rushing all of the funds right out into the field. We also, because the election has already begun in Virginia, early voting has already begun, we are running almost daily phone banks into Virginia. So go to environmentalvoter.org, sign up for a phone bank. Please, please, please join us. Maybe you don't live in Virginia, you live elsewhere and you would like to door-to-door canvass. Well, we're not door-to-door canvassing in Virginia, but we are canvassing elsewhere in places like Pennsylvania, Arizona, Texas. Please also go to the Get Involved page on our website if you're interested in canvassing. Finally, if you're interested in getting more briefings like this, subscribe to our YouTube page. We're going to be putting a lot of these out in the lead up to the election, and we really, really want our volunteers and our donors and our fans to be as well informed as possible. So go to environmentalvoter.org, join our work, and finally, thank you. Thank you for spreading the word about our important work, and thank you for helping us to mobilize these over 320,000 low-propensity environmental voters in Virginia, a state that's going to be a heck of a lot more important than people realize this fall. Take care, folks.